Right. Good evening. uh, the agenda for today is to talk about electromagnetic methods for surveying. This is it works uh, com- similarly to the electrical resistivity. We are still measuring here the electrical property of the subsurface. If you remember the resistivity lecture, okay, electromagnetic methods also measure the electrical property of the subsurface. Although the big difference here is we do not need a direct ground contact when we are using EM or electromagnetic methods, right? And we can, as a consequence, or the advantage of that is we can conduct airborne electromagnetic surveys. We can measure the conductivity or resistivity using aircraft. And of course, with that, you can cover a large area, okay, compared to a conventional resistivity method. Right? And if you remember, conductivity is simply the inverse of resistivity. Okay? Conductivity is measured in Siemens, while resistivity is measured in ohm meter. And this is the essential concept behind electromagnetic induction. I'll just open the demonstration. Right? If you will remember the magnetic methods lecture, essentially all objects have magnetic dipoles. Magnetic dipoles are like baby magnets, but on a atomic level. Right? So every object, including you, me, your pet, your cell phone, your laptop, when subject to an external magnetic field, uh, of course, the magnetic dipoles or the baby magnets within your body or within your objects will react to that magnetic field. Okay. And the magnetic dipoles will try to realign. Okay. They will always try to align with respect to the external magnetic field. And whenever you and whenever the magnetic field is moving or is not constant, okay? Ano yun? Ano malalaglag? Projector? Kaya mo na, malaglag na to, malaglag. Okay, so whenever there is a magnetic field, no, the magnetic dipoles will try to align. Ano yun? Tingnan. Right? Ah, kaya, hmm? It's just part of the demo. Ay, hindi kita. Sorry. Ah, I see, I see. Duplicate. Ayan. Okay. Right. Of course, whenever you subject any object to an external magnetic field, the magnetic dipoles or the baby magnets within any object will try to align with the magnetic field. Now, if the magnetic field is not constant, like it's moving or it's switching intermittently or pulsating, the magnetic dipoles will try to catch up with the changes. Okay? Where they'll try to chase after the changing magnetic field. And as a result, it will cause a current to flow along the body. In this case, this coil of wire is our body that we're talking about. Now, in the electromagnetic methods, the subsurface objects which we will be surveying, that's your body, right? This is like your subsurface object, this electrical coil. Okay. And what we're simply doing is we're simply introducing a non-constant or a oscillating or a pulsating magnetic field, okay, to the subsurface. Okay. And the consequence of that is the subsurface will naturally create or induce an electrical current. And in turn, that electrical current will also create another magnetic field, which can be detected by the electromagnetic instrument. Okay. So essentially, you're just trying to magnetize the subsurface. And as the subsurface gets magnetized, it will create a current, and the current will also create a secondary magnetic field. Okay. So whatever you read from your instrument, of course, the response of the subsurface will depend on its electrical property. We're gonna delve on that later on. Uh, right? And that principle is called the Faraday's law. Okay. Okay, let's talk about how do electromagnetic waves propagate. Okay. Okay, so earlier we were talking about electromagnetic fields. Sorry, we were talking about magnetic fields and the propagation of magnetic fields are related to the propagation of your electromagnetic waves. Okay. Okay. Right? For electromagnetic methods, what we are doing is we are essentially propagating electromagnetic signals. Okay. So what are the examples of electromagnetic signals? I'm sure you're familiar with that. Okay, so it can be ultraviolet rays, depending on the frequency. Okay, usually the electromagnetic waves with highest frequencies are your X-rays, Y rays, your gamma rays. Gamma ray I think that's coming. I think it's a radiation from nuclear reactions. X-ray from your doctor's checkup. UV from the sun. You also have your visible spectrum, your infrared, your microwave, radio, and then long radio waves. Okay. Okay. And electromagnetic or EM waves, when they travel in air, air has zero conductivity and they can easily travel through air with minimal loss of energy. And whenever EM waves travel, they intermittently flip from an electric field to a magnetic field. Okay? And if they're traveling in a non-conductive media like air or vacuum, you get minimal loss or no loss in energy conversion, and the EM wave can propagate indefinitely. Okay, so they can travel very long distances in vacuum or in air. Now, the propagation of EM waves are described by Maxwell's equations. And I think one important concept here is the geometric effect. Okay? The effect of wave propagation on the amplitude. Right? If this is your wave, this is your amplitude, right? The height of the wave. That's your amplitude. But, okay. Kita. Kita. Ah, it's weird. Nag-annotate pa naman ako. Wait lang ah. Ah, weird. Wait lang. Kaya pala. Wait lang. Kita. Why? Ayan, kita. Right? If I'm gonna draw a wave, right? It should be symmetrical. Okay. Anyway, the height of the wave is your amplitude. That represents the energy of your wave. Okay. The bigger the amplitude, the bigger the disturbance, the bigger the energy. Now, if you're gonna look at waves, normally propagate in a spherical shape, right? So, like a expanding balloon. Okay. If you're gonna try to look at them in 2D, you can also approximate it as like the wave in a pond. If you drop a pebble on your pond, you will initially get a very large amplitude. And as the wave spreads out, okay, it will gradually have a smaller and smaller and smaller amplitude. Okay, because the energy is being distributed on a bigger area. Okay. That's the geometric effect or the effect of spreading on the amplitude of your wave. Okay. Okay, the consequence of that is that your wave loses energy as it spreads out. Okay. It gets a decrease in amplitude. And waves travel at a velocity with a wavelength and frequency. You can imagine the velocity if as that's the speed or the velocity. Wavelength is like the stride of the person who's running. So if your person is long-legged, they can have a big wavelength. If the person is short-legged, it will have a shorter wavelength. And then the frequency is the number of steps you make per second or number of cycles you make per second. Okay. And And this is the relationship between velocity, frequency, and wavelength. So just multiply your frequency with wavelength, you're gonna get the velocity. Right? So essentially, we discussed the EM wave propagation in air or in vacuum. Okay? And that's what's happening when your EM instrument is sending out or transmitting signals from above. Diba? As I've discussed earlier, EM methods do not need ground contact. Okay. So the instrument is usually above the ground, okay, maybe a few meters above the ground or even airborne. Okay. You're just carrying the equipment. Okay. So initially the EM waves will travel through the air. So you're doing wave propagation. Now, once the electromagnetic electromagnetic signals enter the subsurface, they will start propagating now by diffusion, right? And when you're talking about diffusion, you're talking about induction of electric currents. Okay, so as the signals penetrate the earth, it will induce electric currents in the earth, right? And some of them will be wasted as heat energy, and it cannot be recovered. It will be lost. It will be a lost signal. Okay. Generally, when you have a highly conductive body or highly conductive subsurface, you tend to lose a lot of energy when you're propagating waves. Okay, so this process of diffusion, okay, or the loss of signals into heat energy also causes your EM waves to lose signal, right? And this equation simply describes the loss of signal with distance. Okay, so it's a function of distance and a function also of what we call the skin depth. Okay. So of course, you lose signal over distance due to the spreading of your waves, your geometric spreading. You also lose signals due to the conductivity of your subsurface. And that it's described by the parameter called skin depth or delta, small caps delta. Skin depth or delta is a quantity that's proportional that okay, so skin depth decreases with increasing frequency. Okay. So generally the higher the frequency, the shallower the skin depth. Okay. So when you have a high frequency, generally waves lose energy for every cycle. Okay. Okay. As waves, so this is one cycle, right? This is one cycle. So every time they cycle, they lose some energy. Okay, it could be due to spreading, it could be due to the conductive or heat energy loss. Either way, they lose energy whenever they undergo a cycle. And the higher the frequency, the more cycles you get, and the more energy loss you get. And as a consequence, you get to penetrate a shallower depth or a shallower skin depth because of the loss of energy. It's a number which represents it's the penetrated depth. It's the depth penetrated by the EM signals pala. So generally, the higher the frequency, the shallower the penetration, okay, because you lose a lot of energy. Conductivity also, increase in conductivity will also decrease your skin depth because whenever the ground is more conductive, you tend to lose a lot more energy due to heat conversion. Okay. Right? And as a consequence, if you want to do a deep survey, you will need to use low frequency method. So I think you're familiar, you encounter that in seismic reflection, generally lower frequency, deeper penetration, less energy losses. Right? Amplitude decreases again due to your geometric spreading and your conductive losses. You also call that attenuation. Okay. Now, the movement of your EM waves in the subsurface is actually a split between diffusion and wave propagation. So it's not completely just about diffusion. So you get a split between diffusion and wave propagation in the subsurface. And to determine whether wave propagation or diffusion will dominate, which one will dominate the propagation in the subsurface, it can be denoted by the ratio R, okay, which depends on your conductivity and your frequency and your dielectric permittivity in free space or vacuum. So this value you can just ignore this. Okay. Anyway, we always assume a permittivity value of 8.85 times 10 to the negative 12. So this is more or less a constant value, right? The R now is simply just a function of your conductivity and your frequency, right? Let's do some calculation. Consider the scenario. We have a GPR survey. Again, GPR survey is actually a type of electromagnetic method. Although in GPR, we usually rely on wave propagation. Okay? Conventional EM methods rely on diffusion, while GPR relies on wave propagation. So we're gonna discuss that later. Right? Let's say, for example, you have a GPR which uses a signal frequency of 100 megahertz. Okay? So you have to note the mega. 1 megahertz is equal to 1 million hertz. Okay? Mega is million. And you're doing a survey in ice, okay, which has a resistivity of 10,000 ohms per meter. Right? So we're gonna use the equation here. Okay. So I have a spreadsheet. Okay, ito na copy. Oh my God. Anyway, just gonna do that later on. Anyway, R is just equal to your conductivity, but you only have resistivity. So what are we gonna do now? To get to get your sigma or your conductivity, you simply need to get the inverse of your resistivity. Okay, so this term is, try to minimize. Diba? Okay. This term is your conductivity. You're just inverting your resistivity. Just divide 1 by resistivity, that's your conductivity. This is 2 pi. I don't know how to compute pi beyond 1416. And then this is your frequency, 100 megahertz. Actually, you need to multiply this by, this is 100 hertz times 1 million. Okay, right? So 100 megahertz is 100 million hertz. And then you just multiply it by the dielectric permittivity at vacuum, okay, whatever this value is for now. Yeah, most of the time you just use that value. The resulting value is 0.017. The definition of small r values is less than zero point 0.1. Okay. So this is smaller than zero point 0.1. Therefore, we have wave propagation in this case. Okay, we also have a similar example with the EM31. This is the brand model name of the instrument. So electromagnetic methods is also a good lesson on monopolies. It's monopolized by the company Geonics. Okay, and they usually just, their models are EM31, EM34, EM28. Okay. So it's essentially a pseudo monopoly of equipment. Right? The example is you have a EM survey, which is mapping a contaminant plume. The instrument has a frequency of 9,800 hertz, and the ground has a resistivity of 10 ohm meters. So this resistivity value is typical, I think, for clayey soils, okay, 10 ohm meters. So let's, right? So again, this is your conductivity. Just get the inverse of your resistivity, 2 pi, and then your, sorry, this should be just hertz, 9,800 hertz. So I did the calculations in spreadsheet. So this typo doesn't have a bearing on the results. Anyway, the value is 0.18. So this is a large value because it's bigger than zero point 0.1. Therefore, it's dominated by diffusion. Ulit na to. Okay. Right. This is another important example. I think this is relevant for our setting in the Philippines. Again, in the Philippines, you have a humid environment. You have, yeah, humid environment. So you have a lot of weathering. Humid, hot environment, you get a lot of weathering. You get also a lot of clays everywhere in the Philippines. And I'm just gonna demonstrate here why clays are the bane of existence for GPR. So you have a clay soil with a resistivity of 5 ohm meter. So again, this is typical for clays. For clays, you get something like 1 to 10 ohm meters resistivity. The GPR has a frequency signal of 100 megahertz. In GPR, 100 megahertz is already the low, one of the lowest frequencies you can get. Okay. Mm. You can go as high as usually 1,000. It's super shallow. 100 megahertz is supposedly the deep signal. In our office, we have a 16 megahertz GPR, but it's super bulky. It's like 4 meters span antenna. Uh, we use it very rarely because most of our projects are outside Luzon, so we have to fly in with all that equipment. It's always not possible. It's very a hassle logistically. The airlines will try to charge you a lot for insurance when you're transporting anything expensive. I think last time they tried to charge us 70,000 for insurance, for just a flight insurance. Local flight. Uh, yeah, so let's calculate the skin depth for GPR. Okay, so yeah, earlier we calculated the R value, so we know now whether diffusion or wave propagation will dominate. So this now is about skin depth, or this is the depth penetrated by the EM signal. So skin depth is just 500 divided by the quantity of conductivity of square root of conductivity and frequency. And you have 500 divided by square root of conductivity. So this is your ohm meter. Again, this is your conductivity term. You just get the inverse of resistivity. This one is the frequency. Okay? And what you're gonna get is something like zero point 0.1 meters. Okay? So zero point 0.1. If you're trying to do something geologic, not gonna get it. You won't get a lot of information from that. I think 4 years ago, I moderated a geocon session, and someone presented doing GPR survey. Sorry. Shit. Someone presented doing a GPR survey on a recent landslide in Benguet. Okay. So I saw that landslide. It's a landslide in a hydrothermally altered area. So everywhere you everywhere is clay, no? Clay. The mountain is clay. The deposits are clay. And this presenter tried to claim that they did a GPR survey on that landslide. They used a 1,000 megahertz antenna. And they said they penetrated 30 meters. Okay. So I argued with the presenters and may I argue, pero I had some heavy questions for them as the moderator. So later on, I applied in their office. They ignored my job application. So anyway, that's GPR for you. It's very sensitive to clays. Okay? I mean, not sensitive, but it doesn't work on clays, no, effectively. Now let's have a counter example. Some EM methods also employ the waves from some electromagnetic methods also employ electromagnetic waves generated by lightning. Okay, I'll try to cover that maybe next week. In this example, you have low frequency radio waves from magnetosphere with a frequency of 0.01 hertz. And the crust of the Earth has a average resistivity of around 200 ohm meters. So how deep will this signal travel? Again, this is your conductivity term. Just get the inverse of 200, okay, 200 ohm meters. And then this is your frequency, 0.01 hertz. And the result is you have 200,000, 223,000 meters or 223 kilometers. So it can penetrate really deep. Okay. Super low frequency radio wave, okay, 0.01001 hertz. Right, how do electromagnetic methods work? Again, I've right, you have as I've discussed earlier, this is like your wire loop in the Faraday's law demonstration. For example, your ore body or your economically significant rock containing economically significant minerals. So let's say the ore body is relatively conductive. What we're doing essentially is we're essentially subjecting this to a magnetic field that is varying over time, like either it's flipping or it's um pulsating, like it's turning on and off. And the result of that fluctuating, hmm, the result of having a fluctuating magnetic field is that the conductive body will, let's try red. The conductive body will eventually will induce its own electric currents. And that electric current gets induced intermittently because the magnetic wave is intermittently occurring. Okay. And as a result, the conductive body will also get to induce its own magnetic field. And this will be detected by the receiver or the RX. Okay. So that's RX is receiver, TX is your transmitter. Okay. So step by step, the transmitter will first transmit a primary magnetic field. Okay, so this is an equipment that contains a coil where you are running a current. Okay, so coil with a current, um, physical coil with the current. This will generate a magnetic field, but it's a pulsating magnetic field. No? Usually it's either a flipping magnetic field or a on and off magnetic field. Okay. The general term for that is oscillation. Okay. So as long as it's not constant, it's oscillating. So this will induce currents in your conductive body. And your conductive body, again, since the induced currents are also oscillating, They will also generate secondary magnetic field, which would be read by the transmitter. Okay, so the transmitter, depending on your method, depending on the type of EM survey, this will be reading just either a combination of the transmitter and the primary and the secondary magnetic field. Okay. Or sometimes they just eliminate completely the primary magnetic field. Okay. So we have two main types of EM survey. You have a lot of types, but the two common types are you have the frequency domain and the time domain. For the frequency domain, what they do is they first they first calibrate the equipment, okay, in a area with no conductive materials. Okay, so they just try to read the strength of the magnetic field of the transmitter only. So they calibrate it first. So the strength of the magnetic field from the transmitter is already known. No? So we already know that. And then what they do during the survey is they simply oscillate the magnetic field. Okay. And as this one oscillates, they also read they can also what they're gonna read now is the sum of the magnetic fields of the primary and the secondary. Okay. And from the proportions of that, they can derive the conductivity of the material. Okay. So you will have different resulting ratios of the primary to secondary magnetic field. Okay. So that's for the frequency domain. For the time domain EM, what they do is they simply turn on the transmitter. Okay, so they momentarily turn on the transmitter and then they turn it off. Okay. The advantage of that is once you turn off the main transmitter, the receiver will not read any signal from the transmitter. It will simply purely be detecting the magnetic field from the conductive body. Okay, so you get to isolate only the signals from the conductive body, okay, by turning off the transmitter. Okay, we're not done yet. Time domain, where the one where you turn off the transmitter. Okay, let's continue with the second part of the discussion. Right, primary magnetic fields. Let me adjust. Hey, you don't need to absorb anything from here. We're just gonna define a few things here. So if we're gonna look at the transmitter on a closer perspective, the transmitter works by flowing an electric current. So this is a physical loop of wire, and you have a power source somewhere, and it's supplying current to this loop. Okay. Yes, one loop for the transmitter and one loop for the receiver. The current is essentially circling around the loop. Okay. And it has an angular frequency of uh, the Greek W. I don't remember. I think this is omega. So it has an angular frequency, meaning um, this is like angular frequency is just like how fast it's rotating or it's circulating around the circling the loop. Okay. Right now, this current I, okay, is fluctuating as a function of your angular frequency. Okay, so this is responsible for the oscillation of your current, no? Okay, the fact that it's circling around, it's causing the current to effectively fluctuate. Okay. And this fluctuation of the current causes the magnetic field to also fluctuate or oscillate, no, from the transmitter. Right? We also define S. So this is an important parameter here. S is the radial This is simply the distance between the transmitter and the receiver. S. Okay, so that's an important parameter which will be repeatedly discussing later. Okay. Now, this HPZ is the strength of your magnetic field from the transmitter. Okay. So this is your primary magnetic field from the transmitter. The stronger the current, the stronger the magnetic field, the bigger the area of the loop, the bigger the magnetic field. The bigger the separation, however, between the TX and the RX, the smaller the magnetic field from the transmitter. Okay. Okay. Okay, so again, if you don't have any subsurface conductor, you will only be reading the field of the transmitter. Okay. Okay. If there is a subsurface conductor, a conductive body, an ore body, or a metal object in the subsurface, for example, you get to detect both the primary and the secondary magnetic fields. Right? And this is how we measure the apparent resistivity or apparent conductivity of the subsurface. So we're gonna be interchangeably using resistivity and conductivity here because essentially we're just measuring the electrical property. Okay? So we're just gonna be interchangeably using this for no reason. Okay, so again, this is just a repeat of what we discussed. As you put a transmitter next to your conductive body, your magnetic field now will extend to the earth or the subsurface. And if this is your magnetic field, okay, so this is a right hand rule, right? If your primary magnetic field is going this way, the if the current is going this way, the magnetic field will be going this way. It will be going downward. So you have a magnetic field here. Okay. And the resulting current will try to oppose. Okay. The current generated in the subsurface will oppose that magnetic field. So if the current in the transmitter is going this way, the current in the subsurface will be going on the opposite way. Okay? And it will also generate a magnetic field that's going to oppose the primary magnetic field. Okay, so again, we lose energy to conductive losses or ohmic losses. Okay, and again, this attenuation is related to skin depth. We already discussed that. Okay, so again, we already discussed this part. Now, this is the somewhat important part. So this is just the equation for the total magnetic field. Okay, don't need to try to read too much on that. Okay, and this equation simply describes the ratio between the total magnetic field Hz and the primary magnetic field. Okay, so the total magnetic field is your primary plus your secondary, and then this one is just your primary. Okay. Okay, and these expressions become much simpler with low induction numbers. Okay. So induction number is just a ratio between the distance between your transmitter and receiver and your skin depth. Okay. So you get low induction numbers when your spacing is small. Okay. For example, a small EM equipment. Okay, this is common for ground-based equipment. You have small transmitter receiver separations. Skin depth becomes smaller and you remember, high frequency, diba? High frequency, you get smaller skin depth, shallower, diba? Higher conductivity, you also get shallower skin depth, right? Generally, for ground EM surveys, you usually have low induction numbers. And the practical meaning of low induction number is that as you generate your primary signal, okay, so if this is your transmitter loop, okay, so this is what's happening at low induction numbers. As you generate the signal immediately hits or enters the subsurface. Okay? That's the only practical meaning of low induction numbers. For high induction numbers, the EM signals travel only through the air, no, from the receiver to the transmitter. Okay, the the signal is only traveling through the air. Okay, so this is more of applicable for I think for aerial surveys. Okay. Okay, so basically low induction number, you're close to the ground, and your signals are simply traveling immediately at the subsurface. For high induction numbers, Um, the signal as it travels from the transmitter to the receiver, it travels through the air. Okay. Okay, for very low values of Ks, I'm gonna go back to Ks value. So S is the spacing, K is your value, which is proportional to your angular frequency and your conductivity. Okay. So generally, Ks is a function of your spacing and your conductivity. For subsurface objects with low to moderate conductivity, okay, the equation is simplified to this one, right? Okay. So essentially, for most cases, we are mostly dealing with relatively low to moderate conductivities, right? Earth, diba? So you can imagine the Earth. It's generally resistive except for maybe clays or salt water. But for most cases, we can consider our survey as low to moderate conductivity. Okay. So if we have that case, you have low to moderate conductivity, which gives us a very low Ks number. We can calculate the conductivity of the ground as a function of the angular frequency of your signal, okay? Angular frequency of your signal, mu or the permeability in the free space. So again, this is mostly a constant number. S is your spacing between the transmitter and receiver. Okay? You also have this imaginary number operator. Okay, but this is just denoted for the imaginary numbers are usually used for polar coordinates. Okay, so we're dealing with spherical propagation of waves. Okay. Anyway, we can safely ignore this one, this operator, for most low to moderate conductive bodies. So in practice, we usually just ignore this operator. So in practice, this equation is simply this term multiplied by this term. So this term, again, is the ratio between the total magnetic field to your primary magnetic field. Okay. So this is what you're measuring, okay, in the EM survey. And these ones are the parameters of your equipment. Okay. So equipment, and this is just your survey. And from there, you can calculate the average conductivity of the ground. So again, this is an apparent conductivity because we are simply averaging the conductivity of the subsurface. Okay? So if it's a homogeneous ground, like you just have one type of soil, one type of rock, it's the you're getting the conductivity, no? However, if the ground is heterogeneous or layered, which is almost always the case, then we're simply only getting the apparent or the average conductivity. My God. Hmm? All right. Now, EM surveys can also use different orientations of their coil. So again, this is your conceptual setup of your EM survey. You have two coils, and this can be oriented either horizontally or vertically, okay, depending on your survey objectives. Right? For example, if you're doing a frequency domain survey, actually, this is also applicable for time domain. So you can uh, change the orientation of your transmitter and receiver coils depending on your desired depth of survey or desired sensitivity. And the most common are the orientations are the horizontal coplanar and the vertical coplanar. Okay. They're also called vertical dipole and horizontal dipole orientations, right? And for horizontal coplanar, you're simply orienting the loop parallel to the ground. Okay, so yeah, you're just resting the loop horizontally. For VCP or vertical, you are orienting the loop vertically. For horizontal coplanar, this is quite sensitive to steeply dipping conductors. We're gonna discuss that later on. For vertical coplanar, it's sensitive to it's sensitive. It's good for measuring materials for the surrounding materials. Okay. As you can see here for vertical coplanar, you are you are getting the fields which are traveling horizontally. Okay. And the tendency for VCP is you tend to perceive objects which are quite deeper, and you tend to get or detect signals from the surroundings, okay, for VCP. Now for HCP, as you can see here, you are directly getting signals from the subsurface. Okay, so this is quite good for shallow conductors or steeply dipping conductors. Okay. Okay, this one's gonna be discussed in the succeeding slides. Now let's talk about the different instruments. Okay, courtesy of Geonics. the so these are the most commonly used EM instruments. You have the EM38 model. It has a spacing of 1 meter and has a depth of penetration of 1.5 meters. So it's not really useful for most geology studies or even engineering. So it's usually used for agriculture, okay, for studying the salinity of soils, studying the moisture of soils. So in the Philippines, this might not be a big deal, but maybe for US or Europe, where they tend to be quite scientific with their like for example, grape farms or different high value plantations. They tend to invest on geophysics for their agricultural activities. You also have EM31. Again, this has a spacing of 3.6. The deepest penetration depth it can get is 6 meters. So the website is claiming that it's good for engineering purposes. Okay, but to be honest, it's not really useful. For for most geotechnical or engineering purposes, you need usually around 30 meters penetration. So this one is not really useful for engineering applications. Now, this one is, I think, a bit more interesting for me, the Geonix 30 EM34. So it can use different intercoil spacings. It can do 10 meters, 20, and 40. And the deepest penetration depth it can do is 60 meters. Okay. So it's also used again for groundwater exploration. Okay. Mhm. Uh, Continue. Right? This is a more familiar image for me when you're talking about EM because you can quickly see right away the loops. Okay, okay, so you can immediately see the loops. So the loops again are just you're simply circulating current in your loop. One of these will be the transmitter. Okay, so the transmitter will be you are simply circulating current in your transmitter, and that circulating current is um is essentially a non can generate a magnetic field. Okay, so this magnetic field will penetrate the subsurface. Okay, and this magnetic field will sort of induce a current in your subsurface. Okay, and that induced current in turn will also create another secondary magnetic field which will be detected by the receiver. Okay, right? EM34 can has a maximum coil spacing of 40 meters and that can go as deep as 60 meters. So we're gonna discuss later how these penetration depths were derived in this section, right? Again, the signals which we detect in EM are the secondary fields, okay, coming from the secondary current. Okay, so our primary current again is coming from the transmitter. So the primary current in the transmitter is creating the primary magnetic field. And the primary magnetic field will induce secondary currents in the subsurface. And their pattern of propagation is they initially have a sort of big loops, okay, at the shallow depths. And as they propagate to greater depths, you get smaller and smaller loops of current. Okay. And as we've discussed earlier, most of the theoretically the signals of electromagnetic surveys can only go as deep as the skin depth. Skin depth is limited by the conductivity and the frequency of the conductivity of the ground and the frequency of the signal. Generally, the higher the conductivity, the greater the energy losses of the signal. So when you have highly conductive objects, you lose a lot of signal due to conversion to heat. Okay? So you can also imagine, for example, your induction cooker. Induction cooker also works using this same principle. They use electromagnetic induction. So you're essentially disturbing the metals in your cookware, and the EM waves get converted into heat energy in your induction cookers. Anyway, the higher the conductivity, the shallower the penetration. The higher the frequency, you also get shallower penetration. Okay, mainly because waves lose energy for every cycle they complete. Okay. So every cycle completed, they lose energy. And whenever you have a high frequency signal, you have a lot of cycles completed for every distance traveled. For every depth traveled, you get to complete a lot of cycles. So in effect, they tend to lose a lot. They cycle a lot and they lose a lot of energy as they travel a short distance. Okay. Now, from this point, we have to sort of pivot with our narrative. In EM surveys done at low induction numbers. Okay, so again, EM surveys done at low induction numbers are mostly the surveys done at the ground. Okay? Ground EM surveys. So for EM surveys, the depth of investigation is actually limited by the setup of the equipment, not really the skin depth. And we're gonna elaborate that in the succeeding slides. So you have your phi V and phi H. These are just the functions which describe the response which they perceive from the subsurface. Okay. Systems. Okay. And these functions are called the relative response functions. Okay. So if you plot them, these response functions on a graph, you're gonna plot them. This axis is your depth. Okay, this is your depth axis, and this is the strength of magnetic field being perceived. Okay, so for a VCP orientation or a loop switcher oriented vertically. Okay, so as you can see here, in VCP orientation, you are detecting EM fields which are oriented horizontally. Okay? So again, the consequence of that is that you tend to perceive signals from great depths. And VCP also tends to detect a lot of signals from the surrounding materials. Okay. Okay. So as a consequence, at shallow depths, you get almost you get zero response from a VCP. Okay. So generally, as you can see here, it's simply detecting horizontal fields, right? So the layers at the shallow subsurface, the shallow materials or the shallow soils, okay, they're usually not perceived by the VCP, okay, because their fields, okay, are mostly oriented vertically. Okay, so if your loop is here, if your VCP is oriented like this one, it will only detect horizontally oriented magnetic field lines. Now, if you have shallow objects, okay, typically the magnetic field lines of any object will usually start. The lines will initially start as vertical field lines, no? And then they will just branch out into horizontal lines as they travel further, right? So most of the signals perceived by the VCP are signals from deeper objects. Okay? So as a consequence, the shallow part of the subsurface is not really read by the VCP. You get zero response from the shallow layers. And then most of the layers that's actually strongly detected by the VCP are in this one, right? In this ratio at z equals to 0.4, okay, where z is a ratio between the distance and the uh, spacing of your coils. Okay. So VCB will mostly detect a depth that's 1/4 of your coil spacing. So if your coil spacing is 10 meters, your VCP will be detecting around the layers located at 4 meters. Okay. Now for HCP or horizontal coil configuration, so your coils are oriented parallel to the horizon. As you can see here, they tend to detect field lines which are oriented vertically. So again, if you have shallow layers, again, their magnetic fields will initially propagate as vertical field lines, and then as they go further and further, they tend to flow horizontally. So in HCP, most of the values that you are actually detecting are from the shallow surface, shallow subsurface. Okay, right? You get to immediately detect shallow bodies from the HCP. And therefore, VCP gives you the biggest depth of penetration, okay? While HCP gives you the largest sensitivity to shallow objects. Okay? So this will depend on your objectives. If you were, for example, looking for a deep ore body, you might be more interested with VCP. If you're looking for shallow objects, maybe for archaeological purposes or maybe for you're looking for utilities or for engineering purposes, you normally in engineering, whenever we do construction, the worst thing you can do is to hit a a buried electrical line or a buried pipe. Okay. So it's one of the things you want to avoid when you're constructing anything. Um, yeah, so that's maybe one of the importance of doing EM for shallow on a shallow configuration. Okay. So again, EM doesn't need a ground contact. You don't need ground coupling for EM. So if you're looking for a conductive object or resistive object and you can't afford to have a ground contact, EM can be quite useful, no? So can you imagine doing resistivity on an urban setting where it's hard to get ground coupling with concrete or paved ground? So in this case, EM is actually advantageous. Okay. And to summarize, actually, I'm not summarizing. I'm just jumping to the conclusion of the textbook. The exploration depth for horizontal coils is approximately 0.75 of your coil spacing. And then for vertical coils, the penetration depth or the exploration depth is 1.5, okay, of your spacing. So earlier I mentioned the right EM30 or EM34, for example, can the latest model of EM34 can do 40 meters coil spacing. So if you're gonna do an HCP horizontal no, vertical vertical, diba? Vertical, yeah, vertical. If you're doing a vertical coil for at 40 meters spacing, so the depth of penetration is 40 times 1.5. You get 60 meters penetration depth. So hmm? Yeah, 60. Yeah, tama. Ano, naka-VCP siya. All right, now earlier I mentioned that so we have another calculation problem. Consider the depth extent of an EM31 survey with a resistivity of 100 ohm meters and transmitter frequency of 9,000 hertz. So this 100 ohm meters is the approximate resistivity of the subsurface. Okay. And then 9,000 is the frequency of your equipment. So in here, we have to prove or show that the receiver spacing is more important than the skin depth for for the purposes of determining the depth of investigation. So again, earlier we discussed that skin depth is the depth penetrated by the EM signals. Okay? Skin depth is all about the signals that's penetrating the subsurface. Now, the TXRX spacing, this one is the depth that is detected by the equipment. Okay? Sorry. So theoretically, your signal might penetrate very deep as predicted by the skin depth equation. However, your survey is always going to be limited by the ability of your equipment to detect the signals. Okay? So in this calculation, so the skin depth or delta is equal to 500 divided by the square root of your conductivity multiplied by the frequency. So in this calculation, this term, this is 1 divided by 100 ohms. So remember, conductivity and resistivity are just inverse values. No? So if you divide 1 by your resistivity, you're gonna get the conductivity of the material. Right? In this case, we just got the inverse of 100. Okay. So 1 divided by 100, you're gonna get conductivity. So this is your conductivity term. And then this 9,000 hertz is the frequency of your signal or your equipment. Okay, so the resulting skin depth is 52 meters for this configuration. Okay, so you can theoretically your signals can theoretically penetrate 52 meters. Okay. However, if you're gonna look at the actual ability of your equipment to detect the signals based on the coil spacing, intercoil spacing, or the transmitter and receiver spacing, if you're gonna do a VCP with a spacing of so EM31 can do a maximum of 4 meters as intercoil spacing. So 4 meters, so 1.5 times the intercoil spacing S, you get 1.5 times 4, you get only 6 meters. Right? So in this case, yeah, theoretically the signals can penetrate great depths. However, you are simply limited by the ability of your equipment to actually detect the signals from your conductive bodies. Right? Again, for EM, what we are measuring is the conductivity or maybe the resistivity of the subsurface. And these are all apparent conductivities. No? You are simply measuring, for every survey you do, you're simply measuring one quantity. You're simply measuring the average conductivity or the apparent conductivity of the subsurface. Okay. And for a layered subsurface, okay, this is this function which predicts the apparent conductivity based on the conductivities of your layers. Okay. So it's a function of your depth and the response function, okay, RV as a function of Z. Okay. So the apparent resistivity will depend on the actual resistivity of the layers and the configuration of your equipment. Okay, so you will get different apparent conductivities if you use, for example, a VCP versus an HCP configuration. Okay, for the same subsurface, no? Same site, different configurations, VCP or HCP, you're gonna get different apparent conductivities. Okay. So you have to account for that when you're doing inversion. So again, you can also do inversion in EM. Okay. But it's a lot more complicated to do compared to resistivity because as you can see here, the apparent resistivities are you also have to consider the response functions. Okay, so this is a complicated equation. I'm not gonna delve into that. Okay. So again, as a review, the bigger the S spacing, the deeper the exploration. And in theory, we can actually try if you're interested in determining the conductivities of the subsurface. Okay? If you want to know the variation of conductivity at different depths, in theory, we can do what the same thing we do with resistivity surveys. You just try to change the spacings of the survey. So in resistivity, we increase the separation of the current electrodes versus the we just change the spacing of the potential electrodes, okay, to get a deeper penetration. So in theory, we can also do that in EM. Although again, it's difficult to implement practically because you have to have a receiver that can perceive different frequencies. Okay? So a receiver that can detect different frequencies is actually very hard to do or implement on a when you're talking about instrumentation. Okay, so practically, what's usually done is we usually just have multiple EM equipment, okay, to do measurements of conductivity at different depths. So, so personally, I'm not really familiar with EM systems. No? I'm familiar with seismic and GPR, but that sounds impractical for me. Like, if you want to do a survey with if you want to know the conductivities at different depths, you have to have a set of so many EM systems. So if you're doing a survey on a large scale, that might be practical. I mean, that's probably cost effective, okay, if you want to cover a large area. The cost of of having many EM systems might be negligible. But for me personally, for engineering applications where you only have to deal with small areas, it would be logistically difficult to bring a lot of geophysical equipment on one site and just do a few surveys. No? And these are just demonstrations of how EM systems perceive the subsurface. This top figure shows the actual subsurface layers, right? So you have a this blue object, I think, has a high. This blue object, I think, are low resistivity objects or high conductivity objects. Okay. So this one has a high conductivity. This one has a low conductivity. Okay. So you can see in the upper figure, you have different lines. So this one is an EM31 with a spacing of 4 meters. And the VCP is can you see the power? You have a blue line here, right? You can see this solid blue line. Okay. So this is the depth penetrated by the VCP. It should be 6 meters, but anyway. So this is the depth penetrated by the VCP, by the S by the VCP with spacing of 4 meters. And then the horizontal dashed line here is HCP with a spacing of also 4 meters. Okay. So this red one is the limit penetrated by the VCP survey. And then the pink line here is the limit penetrated by the HCP survey. Okay. So you can see here, this is the response or this is the apparent resistivities measured by the surveys. Okay. So at this point, they're quite similar. Okay. Because you're just dealing with very shallow depths. This one is you have a bigger difference now with the penetration depths. So this solid blue line is penetrated by your EM with a spacing of 4 meters. I'm not sure why. Sorry, I'm not really familiar with the examples. I might have mixed up something. Okay. So this example is just about EM38. So just forget about the EM31. So this is just EM38 with spacing of 1. So you can see here, if you have a VCP with spacing of 1, what's your penetration depth? Vertical coplanar spacing 1 meter. So that just 1.5, diba? 1.5 times 1. So you have a depth that's approximately 1.5 meters. Okay, so this is EM38, okay, VCP. This one is EM38 HCP. Okay. Sorry for the confusion. This one is EM31. Okay. Spacing of 4. At VCP, you can penetrate 6 meters. So this is your VCP at 6 meters spacing for EM31. This one is HCP for EM31. So for HCP, the depth of penetration is spacing times 0.75. So that's 3 meters. And if you're gonna look at the apparent resistivities measured by the two configurations, there's a big difference, right? Okay, simply because the EM the VCP config was able to penetrate a greater depth compared to the HCP, right? And these are just applications of EM surveys. This is EM31. This is about ore exploration. They were looking for sulfide mineralization. So for sulfide mineralization, not really. For sulfides, I think you have clays, you have can't really remember, but generally, sulfide mineralizations are more conductive than the surrounding host rocks, right? And this is your sulfide. These are your sulfide zones, the yellow ones, and the next figure will show the readings from line C. Okay? So as you can see, they encountered sulfide mineralization at the start of the line and then at the middle. And then after that, there was a swamp. Okay. And this is the resistivity profile. Okay, so these are sorry, conductivity readings per station. So this is the sulfide mineralization encountered near the start of the line. This one is the other one encountered at the middle. And the swamp is also conductive. So swamp, it's wet. Okay, you have also a lot of maybe clays. Clays are generally conductive. So you have a relatively conductive reading near at the swamp area. This one is just a comparison of EM and resistivity survey for a contaminant mapping objective. Okay. So this is for this is the result from the resistivity. This is from the EM. Um, they're actually quite similar. If you're not really super similar, but okay. More or less, this is I think this is the landfill that they were trying to locate, or the contamination that they were trying to locate. Okay, and these are the results of the survey. This is the landfill. Okay, landfill. And you can see that the contours are generally, or you have anomalous contours near the landfill. You have high, for the case of resistivity, you have low resistivity towards the landfill, and for the case of EM, you have high conductivity near the landfill. Actually, the EM is seems to be actually better at capturing the landfill. Yeah. If you're gonna look at the contour lines, the anomalies in the EM or the contour lines seem to match better the landfill compared to the DC resistivity. And what's nice about this one is that the EM survey took only 2 days to conduct, while the resistivity survey took 12 days. Okay. So for in some cases, the EM can be advantageous. Okay. This one is another example where they tried to estimate the thickness of the waste layer using EM survey. Although this one required an assumption of the layer conductivity. So, yeah. So they sort of did they had to do some assumptions. Anyway, at the end, you always need to verify our geophysical results. You always need to verify it with actual drilling, or maybe measurements like piezometers to measure the water levels or water pressure. Okay, right. That ends the lecture for EM.